Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about Azure Anywhere. Sounds like a pretty big statement, but hopefully I will be able to explain more. So I work at Dell Technologies. I work within a pre-sales specialist team covering all of EMEA. We are a team focused on all things cloud and containers. So anything that we at Dell are doing with the likes of Microsoft or AWS, Google, anything to do with containers, that's what my team focuses on, so it's a pretty cool place to be. I myself am focused on all things Azure hybrid, so Azure Stack HCI, Azure Arc, that's what I do day in and day out, and have done for the last 4 years, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in that area as well. So very happy to be here to talk to you all today about my two favorite topics. So we're going to take a look at Microsoft Ignite actually happened a week or so ago. I'm sure everyone in here will know that. And the messaging around hybrid cloud change to adaptive cloud. So we're going to take a little bit of a look at that. What does it mean? What is the new messaging? Is it just a new marketing term, or is there some substance in it? We're going to have a little look at Azure Arc. What is it? A bit of an overview and some things that were announced at Ignite. We're going to take a look at Azure Stack HCI. Again, what is it? And a little bit of an update and things that happened to Ignite. And then I'm going to finish by talking about Dell's new Premier solution for Azure Stack HCI that was launched in September. First of all, who tuned into Microsoft Ignite a couple of weeks ago? Hands up, anybody? A couple of people? Okay, so I'll do my best to explain some of the messaging that happened there. So up until literally 2 weeks ago, I used to talk about how Azure was hybrid by design. And I used to talk about the differences between Azure and the other cloud platforms, which are still relevant. So if you think about where Microsoft came from, as opposed to, say, AWS and GCP, they really grew up in the enterprise and on-premises space, much like Dell did, our customers and our partners did. And so they had I would say, a far better understanding of the dependencies, complexities, and requirements of the on-premises world. And so they have really been on this sort of hybrid journey for some years now. In fact, it was at Ignite 2019 that Satya Nadella stood up and said that they first saw the majority of their customers being in a hybrid state. So not just a stepping stone to Azure, but actually being in a hybrid state. You got some big numbers up there that say 82% of enterprises remain hybrid. And there's all this terminology around multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. I really liked, in one of the videos from earlier this morning, a customer said how Cascade don't fear-monger, and I love that because I have been stuck in this space for maybe about 7 years now, and I'm constantly hearing people battle between move to cloud. No, cloud is bad. Cloud is scary. It's not secure. It costs so much money. Stay on-prem. On-prem's better. And I hate that. There are plenty of reasons as to why some workloads cannot move to an Azure data center, and even Microsoft recognize that, and we'll see that as we move forward. I will not explain all of these reasons here. I'm sure some of us are familiar with them or understand them, but ultimately, data regulation sometimes stops data moving to the cloud. We cannot yet break the speed of light, so latency is always an issue. And that has that effect of data gravity and pulls applications and workloads back to where those workloads need to run. On top of that, we've got almost like a re-explosion of IoT and edge happening right now. And so there are plenty of reasons as to why workloads cannot move to Azure. And what Microsoft and what Dell are hearing is that customers want the best of both worlds. They want the flexibility to choose the technology that works for them. And I think we are at an inflection point right now, post-COVID, the era of AI. Everyone's been adapting and rushing to adapt and innovate post-COVID, and I think that's resulted in a sort of sprawl of workloads, and that's definitely what Microsoft are seeing. So Microsoft are saying that what they're hearing from their customers and what they need help with is siloed teams, people who have just been doing their own projects, sprawling workloads across data centers in Azure, out at the edge, and technical debt, something we're all a fan of in IT, aren't we? Just adding to a new version of technical debt. So where Microsoft are now with their messaging is they're now talking about adaptive cloud. And at first I was like, oh no, here we go. This is more marketing terms. What does this actually mean? But I actually like it because it moves away from that thing that I said I really dislike, which is this talk about where a workload should run in terms of location. And it takes us back to the fact that cloud really is a model. It's a way of working. It's a way of deploying, managing, etc. workloads, and it's not about the location. So where Microsoft are now saying is, let's move forward with an adaptive cloud approach that encompasses all of these things. So multi-cloud, hybrid, IoT, edge, etc. And if you look at them, all they are technically is just locations. Yeah, but we've been referring to them for the past couple of years as various types of cloud. And it's saying, Microsoft are saying, what can we do here to bring more consistency in terms of operations and security to these workloads? And basically what they're doing is they're building on the last few years' work with Azure Arc. So over 21,000 customers now use Azure Arc. We'll come on to what that is in a minute. And they are building on the work they've done so far with Azure Arc to enable this adaptive cloud approach. So Azure Arc integrates with Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Manager is the magic behind Azure. It collects a rich log of metrics and configurations, etc. It's the single source of truth for your Azure workloads. And so Azure Arc comes along and it projects workloads that live outside of Azure into Azure Resource Manager, allowing you to gain a single source of truth across not just your Azure workloads, but workloads that might live outside of Azure. And when that happens, you can start to bring consistency in terms of Azure governance and management capabilities and security across all of those different workloads. So Azure Arc, hands up if you know what Azure Arc is or you're using Azure Arc. I see some hands. It's a very dark room, but I'm positive I see some hands. Okay, cool, right. I'll start at the bottom and we'll explain what is Azure Arc. So Azure Arc is all about extending Azure management and governance practices to workloads that run anywhere. So that could be a Windows or a Linux virtual machine, a Kubernetes cluster. It could be something running on your VMware environment in your data center. It could be the VM running on your Nutanix. I'm going to get fired here. I'm not naming all these different technologies running on your Nutanix cluster in your data center. It could even be virtual machines running in AWS, right? Microsoft have been really heavily focused on the last few years about, as I'm sure you can all tell from the messaging today, developing their governance and management and security capabilities, things like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor, Azure Policies, etc. And what they're saying is, okay, we understand that not all workloads might come to a Microsoft data center, but that doesn't mean that these capabilities can't be used to help manage, govern, and secure all of those workloads. So Azure Arc's all about extending Azure capabilities to any infrastructure. It is then banking on containers being the common layer, again, across infrastructure of the future. Doesn't need to be AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service. It can be any Kubernetes. Those Kubernetes clusters can be Azure Arc enabled and again appear within Azure, and that then forms the basis for customers to deploy Azure services, Azure PaaS services like SQL Managed Instance, and deploy and consume that again on infrastructure anywhere. So they're really saying, hey, we have all this great innovation within Azure, all these great services. Let's make them available to run outside of Azure, where workloads and data need them to run. And then on top of this all, they're saying, let's use the Azure control plane. I'm not going to say the phrase single pane of glass, but let's use the Azure control plane where you can go and you can get visibility of all of your workloads, regardless of whether they are Azure workloads or not. And with that visibility, again, comes back to this consistency around management, governance, and security. So that's what Azure Arc's all about. And fundamentally, the capabilities fall into two main buckets. So the first bucket is Azure Arc-enabled infrastructure. That's what I said at the beginning. It's about projecting your virtual machines, your Kubernetes clusters into Azure so you can see them in the Azure portal right next to your Azure virtual machines. You can apply tags, you can put them in resource groups, you can use your role-based access control and your identity management on those workloads that live outside of Azure. It's really cool. You can also project Kubernetes clusters into Azure as well. And again, start to use things like Microsoft Defender for for Kubernetes. You can use Azure Sentinel. You can use Azure Monitor for all of your virtual machines, regardless of where they're running. The second bucket of Arc capabilities is the ability to deploy those Azure services outside of Azure. So like I said, they need a container base that's Azure Arc enabled. That becomes a target ID for deploying services to, but you can consume SQL managed instance right now on any infrastructure anywhere outside of Azure. You can consume Azure AI and machine learning right now on any infrastructure outside of Azure. So Microsoft are really saying, hey, we've built all these really great services. You do not need to come to an Azure data center to use them. We understand that some of your workloads might not move to Azure, and so let's bring Azure to you. So at Ignite, there was some things announced. There was lots of things announced. Top there, Microsoft Copilot for Azure is coming, which is pretty cool. So we've heard about Copilot today in the terms of Teams and helping you be more productive within your day-to-day emails, meetings, engaging with your colleagues, collaborating, working on projects, etc. Microsoft Copilot is coming for Azure. So that is going to help you in terms of troubleshooting when you're in Azure. You're going to be able to ask Copilot to figure out what's going on with your infrastructure and have Copilot tell you what's going on. So that's pretty exciting. The other things that I want to call out is Azure Arc-enabled VMware vSphere was announced. So if anyone is, we spoke about VMware at the beginning. I've spoken to more VMware customers in the last 3 months than I've ever spoken to. But Azure Arc-enabled VMware vSphere is an enhancement on Azure Arc-enabled servers, and it allows you to actually do lifecycle management of those virtual machines running on your VMware environment in your data center from the Azure portal. And allow you to update, use Azure Monitor, etc. with those virtual machines. And then extended security updates. So hopefully no one has any 2012 or 2012 R2 VMs, but everyone puts their head down and looks away. Extended security updates is an incentive that Microsoft have been using for some time now to encourage customers to move to Azure. You get 3 years free. You also get that free if you move to Azure Stack HCI that we'll come on to. But now, actually, if you Azure Arc enable those virtual machines, you'll get a discounted rate on ESUs. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, Azure Stack HCI, hands up, who knows what it is? Is anybody using it? I see a couple of hands. Okay, I'll start from the bottom. So, Azure Stack HCI is a relatively new operating system from Microsoft. It's a stripped-down version of Windows Server, focused on being an operating system for hyper-converged infrastructure. It is delivered and consumed as an Azure service, so you consume it from Azure. It's per core per month. And it's deeply integrated into Azure. What does that mean? I was really hoping I could show you my Azure portal today, and I checked, and both clusters are not deployed and not connected, so we can't do that. But it's deeply integrated into Azure. It has its own resource provider, meaning that you can see right down to the cluster level of your infrastructure from the Azure portal. So Azure Arc is kind of like from the virtual machine and the workload up, but with Azure Stack HCI, you can see right down to that infrastructure layer within the Azure portal. It's delivered as an Azure service, right? So it's constantly up to date. We are currently seeing about it released in December 2020. We're seeing an annual-ish release of new operating system and features and capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about what was announced at Ignite for Azure Stack HCI. Azure Arc is enabled by default, so as soon as Azure Stack HCI is deployed, it's recognized as an Azure Arc resource within Azure, and you can run Azure Kubernetes service on Azure Stack HCI. So if that is of interest, you can have consistent AKS across your on-premises workloads and in Azure. And Azure Virtual Desktop, which was also mentioned that in the last video, which was interesting to hear, is also coming to Azure Stack HCI. So, as I'm sure everyone here knows, AVD has a huge uptake in the last couple of years, where the majority of users were able to move to AVD in Azure and consume that perfectly fine. But there are types of workloads, maybe those that require really performant machines that are just pretty expensive, shall we say, within Azure, or that need to work with applications, etc., that can't move to Azure. there is a need for something for those users. And so AVD is coming to Azure Stack HCI, which is pretty cool. In terms of how does it look, it starts with hardware. If you fly through the cloud, you hit hardware. There's that saying. It does. It starts with hardware, and the underlying technology is familiar Microsoft technology. So it's Hyper-V, it stores spaces direct, with the Azure Stack HCI operating system on top. Then you can go ahead. You could run your Windows, Linux virtual machines as standard if that's what you want to do, or if you're going down the container path, you can consume things like AKS, which become your baseline to then deploy further PaaS services in the future. So when to use Azure Stack HCI, where do I see people using Azure Stack HCI? This is an interesting question. And my salespeople ask me this all the time. Lisa, what's the perfect use case for Azure Stack HCI? You know, what problems does it solve? Where should we position it? And they ask the same about Arc. And like I said at the beginning, I cover all of EMEA, right? That means I can get pulled into any customer conversations. Small, medium, large. I've presented to household brands, right, that you probably have in your fridge and in your wardrobe. And I talk to, you know, smaller businesses and local government, etc. And the thing that lies across all of those customers is they have workloads in Azure. They have workloads that they can't move to Azure. They would like consistency across the both in terms of management and security and visibility. And that really is the line that goes through every single discussion that I have. So we see a lot of customers moving from Windows Server, right, to Azure Stack HCI. That's something that we see a lot. The kind of robo or edge use case is another one that we see because of that ability to view all of your Azure Stack HCI clusters in the portal. So I speak to customers that have 2 to 3 node clusters distributed across the UK or even across EMEA, and that ability to centrally view them all within the Azure portal is attractive. And that's really where we see AVD. We think it's going to be huge. I've had it's been in preview for a long time, but we've had customers talking to us about that nonstop since it was put into preview. And I think when that goes GA, if Microsoft get the pricing right, it's going to be big. On pricing and licensing, it's $10 per core per month, or local equivalent, or whatever pricing you get from your CSP, or whatever pricing you might have direct with Microsoft. That includes the operating system, right? Hypervisor, storage space direct, etc. Customers were saying, okay, but we've got investment in Windows Server. We'd like to try Azure Stack HCI. We can't justify in both. So Microsoft announced this last year at Ignite, where customers have, if you've got investment already in Windows Server Data Center and you have software assurance, you can transfer those license cores to consume Azure Stack HCI at no cost. And actually, we see customers purchasing that to consume Azure Stack HCI in that way. You also get a bunch of AKS capability for free as well. And the other thing that I mentioned earlier that I always like to make people aware of is extended security updates. Those are free if you move those workloads to Azure Stack HCI because it's considered Azure, right? So they're free if you move them to Azure. They're free if you move them to Azure Stack HCI, which is pretty cool. They also extended the 2008 from 3 years to 4 years, and it'll be interesting to see if they do that with 2012 and 2012 R2. Okay, so there were some announcements at Ignite. There was a lot of announcements at Ignite. I've picked 3, which I think are the coolest, that are coming into Azure Stack HCI. So, with the new operating system for Azure Stack HCI, just went into public preview. We should see it go GA early next year. There will be the ability to deploy virtual machines from Azure directly to your Azure Stack HCI. So instead of picking like UK West or UK East, you would pick your custom location and your Azure Stack HCI. So I'm from Dundee, maybe it'd be Dundee Data Center 1. And then you would deploy your virtual machine to that cluster. In the same way that you deploy and manage virtual machines within Azure. And that opens up a whole bunch of capabilities, again, around consistency. So, and consistency and security, using VM templates, using Azure Resource Manager, infrastructure as code, etc. The next one is, the ability to deploy Azure Kubernetes service. Everything is, up until now, you've had to kind of DIY it with Resource Bridge and other pieces of ARC technology, but that's all built in the new operating system, and it makes it easier to deploy. Again, you just go to the Azure portal, deploy your AKS cluster, and pick your Azure Stack HCI cluster. And then lastly, but not least, I'm very excited about Azure Virtual Desktop coming to Azure Stack HCI because so many people have been waiting on it. So that's exciting. In terms of the Dell piece, so I can take my Microsoft MVP hat on and I can put my Dell hat on now. What are we up to? Where do we fall into this? So we've been Microsoft partners for over 35 years. We're actually Microsoft's largest partner, and we are the only OEM who has been involved in every iteration of Microsoft's on-premises cloud deployments. When Azure Stack HCI operating system GA'd in December 2020, we launched our integrated system for that in February of 2021, and we have seen huge success with that over the last couple of years. In fact, the majority of nodes today running Azure Stack HCI run on Dell nodes. In fact, the majority of Azure Stack HCI, Windows Server, and Azure Stack Hub run on Dell nodes. So we've been running happily with our integrated system for the last 2 years, because at launch, Microsoft offered OEM 2 choices: validated nodes or integrated system. So we went all in with our integrated system. In fact, went far above and beyond the requirements for an integrated system. Basically, we wanted to bring as much of our lifecycle management capability as possible to that platform to allow customers to focus on that Azure innovation on-prem. However, in September, we announced a new platform offering, and at the same time, Microsoft announced a new category, Premier Solutions. And that is the category in which our new platform offering sits within. So what does that mean? It takes it to a co-engineered offering. So Microsoft have our hardware in their labs and are continually testing their software using their CI and CD pipelines against our hardware. It means that we will support Microsoft updates within 4 hours of release. Now, is anyone going to upgrade to a new operating system within 4 hours of release? Maybe not, but if it releases 1 week and your Patch Tuesday is coming up and you can get it scheduled in, instead of waiting the current 30 to 60 day kind of gap right now with the integrated system, you'll be able to upgrade to the new capabilities much faster. We're also maturing the way we do lifecycle management. So we're building on the success that we have had with VxRail. We're taking all of the VxRail as our co-engineered platform with VMware, and that we have seen huge success over the last 7-8 years. We're basically taking everything that we learned from that and putting it into this partnership with Microsoft. It's funny, that seems to be a bit of a theme of the day. So we're taking basically everything we've developed with VxRail Manager, and we've created the Cloud Platform Foundation software, which allows us to do that deeper lifecycle management and integration with Microsoft, with the Azure Stack HCI operating system, and then in the future you'll see integrations and hook-ins to Azure as well. And it also allows us to deeply integrate into our support and serviceability platforms, so we can do, call home, etc. So yeah, really, really taking Azure Stack HCI to the next level. So that ultimately, customers can get to this point, which I didn't realize this had to build up, sorry. So that customers can get to this point. So customers who have workloads in Azure, if you've got workloads in Azure and you've got workloads that are still in your data center because for whatever reason they can't move to Azure, but you're taking advantage of Azure Monitor, Azure Policy, Azure Defender for Cloud, you can get to a point where you can consistently manage and see all of those workloads from the Azure portal and apply these Azure services to your infrastructure living outside of Azure. So that infrastructure doesn't need to be left behind. It doesn't need to be, creating another silo. You can get consistency across these different workloads. And then in the future, if you want to move down that container path, start to consume more Azure PaaS services, etc. on-prem, then you can. So you're not limited anymore by where your data or perhaps legacy applications might need to run. Azure can literally extend anywhere. So that is my quick whistle-stop tour, and I realise I've probably, I've been all right. Maybe spoke a little bit fast, so apologies for that. And that is, quick whistle-stop tour and a bit of an explanation on Azure Anywhere. If anyone has any questions after it, I think we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A, and we're going to hear from Barry and Dom. But if you have any questions about this, I'd be more than happy to chat either now or after the session. I love talking about this stuff, so please do come up and ask questions.
Thank you ever so much, Lisa.